Hey everybody, welcome back to your Pro Tools lesson for today. My name is McKay Tabs and I'm very excited to talk with you today about the wonderful world of MIDI, which if you know nothing about MIDI, just know that it's really cool and it's a really easy and awesome way to immediately get sounds and music in your session. And so, usually you just hook up a keyboard and start playing some things and you put it in there and you've got some MIDI sounds. And one of the best things about them is once you get a MIDI track recorded, you can then change the sounds if you want to. So maybe it was sounding like an organ and you want it to sound like strings. You can just do that instantly by changing the instrument you have on there. But the information, the MIDI information is still the same. So let's start out by talking a little bit about what MIDI is, very briefly, because I just have a feeling that a lot of you already kind of know what it is and you probably have worked with MIDI tracks. But we're going to talk about it anyway very briefly. First of all, MIDI is an acronym, Musical Instrument Digital Interface. So 4 words all put together, and that's what it stands for. And I've got the Pro Tools book right here, and I just thought I'd read right out of it the definition that's in the book about MIDI. MIDI data is different from data stored in an audio file in that MIDI data does not represent sound waves. So audio files represent sound waves, so MIDI data is different from that. It's not sound waves. Instead, it represents information about a performance, such as the pitch, the duration, and the intensity of the notes performed. So the MIDI data is information, it's not sound like the audio data, audio files are. They're sound files. The information there is pitch duration, so it's telling you what note or what pitch is being sounded. The intensity of the note, so like how hard you hit it, and if you hit it harder it sounds louder, right? And if you hit it softer it sounds softer. So MIDI will store that, and then the duration is how long the note is sustained. So you start on beat 1 and it's sustained for 2 measures or something, so it will store the length of the note. So anyway, that's the technical definition of MIDI. One thing you're going to need to know when you're working in MIDI is the difference between like what kind of tracks you use. So there's MIDI tracks and there's instrument tracks. And your first inclination when you're creating your MIDI tracks is to use a MIDI track, since it's called MIDI and you're working with MIDI. So there's a difference between MIDI and instrument tracks, and just remember MIDI tracks are for external hardware that you want to get the MIDI sounds from those devices. Instrument tracks are for your plugins. Your plugins are what's already in your recording system sound, and you can use both to do MIDI, but the easiest and fastest way is to use the instrument track and use your plugins. And usually when people are working with MIDI, that's what they're working with. So that's what we're going to do today, and that's what I want to encourage you to start doing. And then later on someday you might buy like a $2,000 or $3,000 synthesizer and it's got all these cool sounds on it and you want those sounds in your song. So then you're going to need a MIDI track so that you can route your external synthesizer into the system and get those sounds. But anyway, today we're going to be working on instrument tracks. And then, there's something else we got to explain a little bit, the difference between sample-based tracks and tick-based tracks, because you're going to see this in Pro Tools. First of all, MIDI tracks and instrument tracks are tick-based, and audio tracks are sample-based. And the difference between these two bases, I guess, is really a time and tempo thing. With sample-based tracks, those audio files, those tracks, they are a fixed point in time. They cannot change to accommodate a tempo change. Whereas with tick-based tracks, they do change to accommodate tempo changes. Isn't that cool? So with MIDI files, you could start the session at 120 beats and then halfway through change and say, I want to speed up to 140, and your MIDI tracks will automatically speed up to match that tempo. But your audio tracks won't, because they're sample-based. Sample referring to the sample rate when you set up your session, right? The rate of samples that sound is being captured at. So that's how audio files work. But later on, when you get deeper into Pro Tools, you'll start learning about something called elastic audio, which changes audio files to be tick-based instead of sample-based, and allows you to change the tempo of an audio file along with the pitch of audio files. So it's a pretty cool thing. We usually get into it in the Pro Tools 110 book. So just keep that in mind. It is possible to change later on. But anyway, it's just important to start understanding that difference between sample-based tracks and tick-based tracks. You could think of a tick as the block or the mark that's in the MIDI grid, because you're going to see these grids with MIDI notes, and they have these marks in them, and sometimes we call them ticks, a MIDI tick, and not just a little bug. But anyway, let's get into the session now, and let's get creating some MIDI tracks and get started with it. So I am going to share my screen with you. All right, so here is my current Pro Tools session. And the first thing we gotta do is create some MIDI tracks and put them in here. I already have a click track created. So I'm just gonna quickly push Shift Command N. And when I push all three of those together, it brings up the track menu here. So all I'm going to do is just come down here and select instrument track. Remember, not MIDI track. If you want it to work, the easiest way right off the bat is instrument track. And I am going to have 3 instrument tracks in this session, so I'm going to put number 3 there. I am also going to add a master fader into this track because I want to be able to control things with that. And so that's that. So I've got my instrument tracks created. I've got a master fader track. First thing, I'm going to name these tracks. And this first track, I'm going to name it bass because I'm going to have some bass going on there. If I push Command and then arrow to the right, it will automatically take me to the nameplate of the next track, which I'm going to call organ. Get a nice organ sound there. Then I'm going to push Command, arrow to the right again, and it will automatically take me to that next track, which I am going to call drums. So that's a fast way to navigate the nameplate, so you don't have to double click and name it and then double click and name it. You can just command arrow through them. Okay, very important. Before your MIDI will work, it needs to have a MIDI instrument on it. So I'm coming over here to bass first. Gonna zoom in here. Now here I have my inserts list, and if I click on this box right here, I can add an insert, which means add a plugin, an instrument plugin to this track. Now remember that you can also do that in the edit window, in the mix window, because in the mix window at the top of each track you also have inserts, and these inserts are the same in the mix window as they are in the edit window, but sometimes it's nice to do it in the edit window because you're working there a lot, you don't have to toggle back and forth. So I'm going to add an insert here. You got to come down to instrument, and then here's my list of possible instruments for insertion, and I'm going to come down clear to the bottom to this list called this instrument called Expand 2, and that's the instrument I'm going to pick. And I'm going to recommend that you guys experiment with Expand 2, especially if you've never done any MIDI. I really like Expand because there's everything here. There's so many sounds to pick from, and for being a MIDI instrument, I think they actually sound pretty realistic, which is a plus for me. So here I have 4 channels, A, B, C, and D. Right now, I only have a sound assigned to A, channel A. You see this power button here? I can turn channel A off if I want, or turn it on. I could turn the other channels on and off. One of the really cool things is you could have 4 different instruments chosen for this instrument, so you can blend sounds. And that's what I'm going to do today. So I'm going to create a bass sound, kind of a bass guitar sound. So I'm going to come down here to my bass list, and I'm going to scroll down through this, and I'm going to start with, how about a hard finger bass? Let's see what that sounds like. Very important, I'm going to play my keyboard now, and I'm playing it, but you can't hear anything, and it's because you won't hear anything until you record enable the track. So I just barely recorded, enabled the track, and now I could hear my bass sound. Well, that's cool. So it really is as easy as that. You have to plug in your MIDI controller, your little keyboard, you plug that in, you have to record enable the track, you have to pick an instrument and add it to the insert, and then you should be able to hear it. It should just work. So I like that, but let's do some sound blending now. So on the second track, I'm gonna pick another bass sound and blend the two. So here, let's try, I don't know, I guess full finger bass. Let's see what that sounds like. You know what? I heard it get louder when I did that, but it doesn't really sound that different. See these two little arrows right here? You can click on them to go up and down in the menu without having to open the menu. So here's a different sound, full pick bass. Hard double bass. Ooh, I kind of like that. Sounds like an upright a little bit. So I'm just auditioning the sound. Yeah. You know what I'm gonna do? I am gonna come back to that full finger bass. I like that sound. Cool. I got a bass sound. I like it. If I wanted to, I could add another bass in there and make it sound even different. And if I want to control the levels, I can make the full finger bass sound less strong and make the hard finger bass sound louder, or I could turn up the full finger bass more and I could make the hard finger bass come down. So you can blend the level of each instrument you assign to the channel there. And I think I just kind of want an even blend of them, and I'm just going to leave it at that. All right, so now I have my bass sound picked. Now I'm ready to record a bass line. And before I do, I want to introduce you guys to a really cool button over here, a toggle button, and it's called Wait for Note. You see it? It's right here. So here's your MIDI controllers. This is Wait for Note, and I just turned it off. Now I turned it on. Wait for Note. The cool thing about Wait for Note is when it's on, the recording happens as soon as you hit a key on your MIDI controller. So usually when you're recording things, you know, there's the count in and you have to wait and then you come in with the beat. But with Wait for Note, it immediately starts as soon as you push the button or the key on your keyboard. So it's gonna be cool. I'm gonna show you that. This is the metronome button. Remember, you can't hear the metronome unless it's engaged. This is called MIDI Merge, which is an awesome tool, awesome feature. We're not really gonna talk about it today, but it allows you to kind of loop record things into MIDI. And then this is the conductor track, which allows you to break away from the session tempo if you feel like you need to when you're working in this stuff. So we're gonna use Wait for Note. I've got it on and I have my bass track record enabled, so I'm gonna push the record button. I hear my metronome click and you see the red record and green play button, they're blinking. I'm ready to go, but nothing's happening because it's gonna wait for the note. It's not gonna happen until I start playing something. So here I go, I'm gonna start playing something. Oh, well, yeah, I'll just start and see what happens. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. All right, cool, I did it. I recorded some MIDI, and now you see my MIDI ticks in my MIDI clip, and you can see what they look like. Let's do a playback. All right, it sounds pretty good, but I am a human being and I probably didn't practice this as much as I should. The timing is off just a little bit. So one thing you always want to do when you're working with MIDI is after you record something, you want to quantize it. Quantize it is a fancy way of saying it puts it all into time, so it will be right on the beat and right lined up with everything. So right now my timing is off just a little bit. But the cool thing about MIDI is it can snap things right to the grid, right to the bars and beats of everything. So I'm gonna highlight that clip, and then I'm gonna come up here to the event menu, and I'm going to go to event operations, and then I'm gonna come down here to quantize. And now I can quantize those notes to put them in time. And I have this menu where it's gonna ask me, well, what kind of note do you wanna quantize it to? A quarter note, an eighth note, 32nd note? And I'm thinking about my groove here, and I know I do have some 16th notes in it. So 1 and a 2 and a 3 and a 4 and a da 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 da. So I better choose a 16th note subdivision to tie things to. And then all I have to do is push apply and watch what happens to the dark MIDI notes when I do that. You see everything shift just a little bit. Did you see that shift happen? So I just applied. Now if I push play, oh yeah. Oh, that wasn't good. Okay, well, it mostly fixed it. I think the 3 out of the 4 phrases got fixed, but I might have to work a little harder for that second phrase. So anyway, yeah, I can see the second note of that second phrase is just a little bit late, so I need to bring it over a little bit. So how can I do that really quickly? Well, over here, you have different ways of working with your MIDI clips, and you have different views of it. Right now, we're in something called Clips View. It makes your MIDI clip look like an audio file clip when you're working with it. But let's switch this view and go down to Notes View. And when I'm in Notes View, now I'm in a view that allows me to work with the MIDI specifically. I'm going to push this down arrow a little bit, and I'm going to kind of bring them, center the MIDI notes so I can see them all. And if I look at this first phrase here, I'll notice that that's starting right where the bar line is. That's a good one. That's a good place to start. This second phrase is late. It's not starting on the bar line. This third phrase is on the bar line. This fourth phrase is, so that's nice. So I need to fix this second phrase. I'm going to zoom in really quick. You guys see these toggles up here for zoom? If I just push this one on the right, it's going to zoom me in and let me get closer and see what's going on a little easier. So I just pushed it 2 times. So here's my second phrase. All I need to do is drag it to the left. I've got all the MIDI notes selected at the moment, so I need to click off them. So now I can just click on that one MIDI note, have it selected, and then move it over to the left. Did you see how it just snapped right to that bar line? Oh, perfect. That's just what we wanted. So let's zoom out now, and zoom out here, and let's listen and see if it works now. We'll see what happens. Yay! Sounds good to me. Okay. So anyway, sometimes you have to tweak these MIDI lines to get them just right. One last thing about these MIDI views is you can toggle back between Clips View and Notes View like I've been doing. You can also add Velocity View into that. And when that happens, you see these velocity stems. And that is loudness or volume. So you can change the volume of each individual MIDI note. So I'm going to take this first phrase, I'm going to highlight all those velocity stems, and I'm going to pull them down, or at least pull some of them down. And then when we hear that part played, it's going to sound softer. Yeah. So you can manually adjust the volume of each individual MIDI note by going into Velocity View, or Velocity View. I'm going to head back to Clips mode now. I've got this clip made, I'm happy with it, got a bass line, great, let's move on. I'm going to go to the organ track now. I'm going to deselect the record enable on the bass, and I'm going to select the record enable on the organ. And now I'm going to find a nice organ sound, and I'm going back to the instrument list, back to expand to, and I'm going to come here to this list and expand to, and come to the organs, and I'm going to try Jazz Rich and see what that sounds like. Yeah, so that's a nice jazzy sounding organ. It kind of sounds like a ball game to me, but I can just kind of go through each individual track and see. Warm and fuzzy. Oh, shiny full. I like the sound of that. And so now I can add an organ part to this next MIDI track. I've got that selected. Let's see, go back to the beginning. I still have wait for note going on here. So I'm going to record enable the track, and it's going to wait till I start playing to record because wait for note is enabled. So I'm going to put a chord underneath that bass line. Ready, go. All right, so cool. So that's just a pad, when you sustain a chord underneath something. I'm going to trim the clip back so it matches the end of that first clip. One of my MIDI notes at the very end kind of trailed over that. That's okay. So I've got it selected and I just finished recording. So what's the first thing you do after you record your MIDI track? Quantize it. So I'm going to go back here to my quantize menu and you know what? That was just one big long sustained note the whole time. But right at the very end, I threw in the flat third, minor third thing, and it was in 16th note rhythm. So I'm going to keep it 16th notes. Hopefully it will line up those two notes a little better for me. And I just pushed apply. And so now let's listen to it again and let's hear what it sounds like with the organ. Yeah, beautiful. All right, so now we're going to add some drums on there and get a beat going with it. In my last video, I talked a little bit about Boom, the plugin Boom, and so we're going to use that again, but I'm not going to talk about it as much because I feel like I already did in that last video. So here's my Boom. I can push play and I can start hearing beats immediately. I don't really like the timbre of this drum kit, so I'm going to come down here and select Urban 2 and push play. I don't know, I like that timbre better for what I'm about to do, so I think that'll be good. That'll work for what we're doing. So I have Boom 2 here. I need to make sure to come down to record enable the drums track, and now if I just push the C note on my keyboard, on my MIDI controller, the C note will have that whole beat just in it, and all I need to record is myself pushing down that C note the whole time. So I'm once again going to use my wait for note button here, and I'm going to push record, and as soon as I start pushing down that note right there, it will immediately record this drum beat. Alright, and that's it. So now I have a song created with bass, with organ, with drums, and that is kind of how MIDI works. I really like the sounds in Expand. To me, they kind of sound realistic. And then if you think about what MIDI sounded like 20 years ago, it's like MIDI has come a long way. I mean, it used to sound just like video game music, and it just didn't sound realistic at all. But now you could get some really nice, real sounds. But if you want MIDI to sound the very best, combine it with real audio tracks. Have half your session be real audio tracks and maybe the other half be MIDI tracks, and those real audio tracks will, you know, they'll kind of mask the MIDI tracks, just make the whole thing sound like real audio. To me, it sounds like that, especially when you get real guitars in there. A MIDI guitar is not a pleasant thing, in my opinion. It doesn't sound great, but you get real guitar tracks in there, and anyway, you can get some really cool sounds. All right, so a couple other things we're going to talk about really quick in this video is from the next chapter, the chapter about selecting. And one of the first things that the book wants to teach you about is something called universe mode, or universe view. Isn't that a cool name? Now, before I go to universe view, I am going to loop my tracks, and you don't have to do this, but if I don't loop my tracks in advance, then universe view isn't really going to work. So I'm going to say like 20 times. So I just put a loop in there that loops those clips 20 times in a row. So I made it really long. So now my song's going to be like 3 or 4 minutes long because of that. But the cool thing is you can use universe view to see any point of your session and to see all the tracks at once in your session and to jump around to different parts of your session really quick. So anyway, to find your universe view, you're going to come here to the view menu and go to other displays and then go to universe. And then you have this universe view on top. So the universe view is, for me in this session, it's these 3 blue lines on top, and these blue lines are representing these 3 blue MIDI tracks that I have. Notice that there is a white rectangle over here. If I click on it and drag it, it will move, and as it moves, the whole session moves here too. I could also just click at any point on that universe view and I can jump around to different spots. So imagine that you have a session with 20 tracks in it and you're trying to find the bridge of the song very quickly. You're somewhere here in the first verse and you know the bridge is somewhere over here. You can just click on it really quick with this universe view and you'll immediately be to that spot of the song you want to be at. So when you have a session that's really heavy with tracks and you're trying to keep things organized and then you're trying to jump around, universe view can be really helpful for that. The last thing about it really quick is I want to teach you option 7. Option 7. Do that on your keyboard a couple times. Option 7. And when you do that, you will be toggling on and off your universe view. So that's just a really easy way to put universe view on and off. So hit the option 7 there. All right, so one thing that you do in Pro Tools a lot is you make selections. A selection is made when you click on something like that. I just made a selection. Now I'm gonna do some edits in this track really quick and I'm gonna make some cuts. So you see me cutting and editing. I'm just kind of arbitrarily just, for the sake of what we're about to do, I just edited that track a little bit and I don't know where they went. I'm gonna go back to the beginning and edit the track. So, and if you're ever trying to make a cut, it's just Command E. So if you push Command E, you can cut a clip or a track like I'm doing right now. And when you get into the editing phase of your session, you know, you're gonna be doing that a lot. So I just made a bunch of smaller subset clips for my whole file clip. And now I can click on one. And when I did that, I selected it. But look what happens up here. Up here in the timeline, there's this red arrow and it splits in half. It's called the timeline selection in and out points. And it shows you that the in is starting right after bar 3 and the out is ending right after bar 6. If I click on this next clip right here, it'll show you the ins and outs of where that clip is starting. And if I deselect it, then the arrow comes together like this. You can also make selections by dragging. So if I click and drag, and then afterwards I let go, then that can also be a way to select an area that I'm trying to work with. And then along with that, I just want to show you really quick the link, track, and edit selections because it can do something really cool. That's this button right here. I'm toggling it on and off. It's up here in the corner. Sorry, not that one, this one. Link, track, and edit selections. Let's see. Nameplate should come up. Yeah, link, track, and edit selection. So the 3 lines and then the 2 lines with 2 dots on each side. Anyway, the cool thing about this is it allows you to make a selection and then transfer that selection to other tracks. Because sometimes when you're doing an edit, you're doing it across multiple tracks and you're trying to line things up just right. So you can do that. So I have this selection on the bass track, and if I wanted to make that same selection on the organ track, I could then just click on the organ track. And did you see how the selection jumped down to the track? I could do it on the drum track. So you can just click on the track that you're trying to make that same selection on, and it will transfer your selection. And then it's also possible to select more than one tracks at the same time with that same selection. And what I did right there is I got the selector tool and I push shift. So push shift and then use this selector tool, not the grabber hand, the selector tool, and then click on it with that, and then you can transfer your selection across multiple tracks. So, did you ever take a typing class in high school and they tell you how to use all your fingers to type things on the keyboard, and afterwards you're like, man, it's nice to not have to just use these 2 index fingers. This kind of stuff will help with Pro Tools in that same way. Instead of constantly just clicking one and dragging and clicking and dragging, it will save you time because you can immediately select multiple things and skip over time-consuming steps to do the same thing. So let's talk a little bit about the tab key now. I'm going to go back to my bass track and I'm going to go to the beginning of the bass track. Notice that right now we're set at bar 1 and bar 2. If I push tab right now, watch where the cursor goes. Do you see this blinking cursor right here? I'm going to push tab and it immediately jumps. Oh, let me turn this off for just a second. It immediately jumps to the next clip. So here is the next clip in line. So tab can be a way to navigate around the clips. It'll take you to the clip end, wherever the next clip end is. By the way, since the organ and bass track haven't been edited, they're all one big long clip. So if I tried to do this on those tracks, then it'll take me right to the end of the track, like that. But there's also another thing you can do with this. Tab to transient, it's a button up here. I'm gonna push it and enable it. And when you have that on, instead of tabbing to the ends of the clips, it will tab to the next transient or the next note, the next pitch. Now, since I'm working with MIDI files right now, you can see it's just tabbing right to the beginning of each individual MIDI note, and that's really cool. But when you do this with an audio file, it will tab to the beginning of each transient. A transient is the waveform of an audio file. You call that transients. And a lot of times when you're making an edit in Pro Tools, you're trying to insert the selector right at this exact spot where the transient is like starting. So with this tab to transients button, you can basically just drop your selector before that spot, start tabbing, and then when you get to the right transient, you're there and you're done. So it's important to know where that tab to transient button is. It's great. If it's not on, you tab to the end of the clip. If it is on, you tab to the transients in the clip. So very handy thing to know. And just a couple more things really quick is you can adjust the size of these tracks right here. If you go to the left side of any track, you have a drop-down menu that you can click on. And when you do that, it gives you an option for sizes of tracks. So the default option is medium, but you can change it to small, and you see how it becomes small when you do that. That's kind of cool. So once again, if you have 100 tracks in your session, it might make a lot of sense to make those tracks look smaller, and it might make them easier for you to work with. So anyway, you can adjust the track height that way. So I just did it as a micro, but you can also adjust the track height to be very big, very large. So here is Jumbo View, and Jumbo View can be great when you're doing editing, like with transients, and you're tabbing to transients, and you just want to be able to see it really well, so you can make that track look much larger so that you can see it even better. And anyway, that's how you do it. So the track height, you can adjust that. And last of all is we're going to talk about markers really quick. Markers are name tags, you could call them name tags, that you insert at different spots of the song to help you keep track of that spot. So for example, a lot of songs have a structure that goes intro, verse, chorus, bridge. And so you can use these markers to name the parts of your song so that you will immediately know what part of the song that is. So I know that right here at bar 3 is where the intro starts, and the verse is going to start at bar 6. So I'm going to drop the cursor on bar 6. And to add a marker, you hit the plus sign right here. First of all, you have to have the marker's ruler on the session, and then you hit that plus sign. And when you do that, you're putting a memory location in. And I'm going to name this verse 1, and then push enter, and there's my verse 1. Now you can also drag them and reposition them. So it turns out I was wrong. The verse 1 started in bar 5, so I'm going to drag it over to bar 5 and drop it there. So you can do that. And anyway, it can be a way of helping you keep organized of what section of the song you're working on. So here's our Pro Tools session again. I'm going to come up here to the menu, and I'm going to go to Window, and I'm going to go to MIDI Editor Window. That's what we're looking for, MIDI Editor Window. And then I get this thing right here showing up. Right now it's blank. The MIDI Editor Window does not work unless you click on the gray dot next to the instrument you want to see. So here's my bass instrument. I just clicked on the gray dot. Now I can see my bass line that I created. It's all there. Now watch, if I click on the gray dot again, it disappears because I just turned it off. And if I click all 3 of those gray dots together, then I see all my MIDI tracks all layered on top of each other. So usually you don't want to have them all on at the same time because you're just trying to work on one instrument at a time. So here's my bass line, here's my bass track. Now the cool thing about the MIDI Editor Window is it allows you to do all those views at once. So this is basically note view in the edit window. So I can come over here, I can grab notes, and I can change them, and I can change them if I want to, just however I feel like it should work. And then if I push play, I'll hear those changes, pretty immediately in there. So you can, not that you'd want to change it if you have everything perfect, but what usually happens is when you were recording your piece, you made a little mistake. So you want to like erase the notes that are bad. So you can highlight it like this, you can push delete, and then watch that note disappear. Or you can select a bunch of notes all together and watch them all disappear at the same time. Which for my bass line kind of took out the whole bass line when I did that, so I might want to put them back in there. So anyway, you can edit things, and then look down here and you'll see here's the velocity view. Here you can see all the notes all together, and you can see the volumes for them all. These white diamonds signify the highlighted MIDI ticks that are up here on top. If I unhighlight them, the white diamonds disappear. But you can grab these velocity stems individually and drag them up or down to make them louder. Okay, so that's that. So last thing I want to show you is the notation view. And now I am going to click all the MIDI tracks and turn them all on because I want them all to show up when I go to the notation view. And look up here, do you see these two little music notes right here? It says notation display enable. All you have to do is click that button. And when you do that, it takes your MIDI tracks and it converts all those MIDI tracks into notes. So this could be super handy for editing and writing. If you wanted to, you could compose actual notes here and write it in as notes, and then have those notes be converted into the MIDI ticks on the other window. So you could do that. Another really cool thing is you could print out music for your session. So if you want live musicians to play the music you created, you could toggle into this notation view, and from there you could be able to extract individual parts and print them out and then hand them out to your musicians and get them to play your music for you. It's also worth mentioning that Pro Tools is linked with Sibelius notation software. And so those two programs are linked together. So this notation view is showing us Sibelius, and that's how it works. Which also means if you have taken along, if you're a composer and you wrote a bunch of music in Sibelius or Finale, any notation software, and you export that music as MIDI files, you can then import those MIDI files into your Pro Tools session, and you can assign virtual instrument plugins to each instrument that you import, and immediately have all the sounds of Pro Tools on your track, because sometimes Sibelius and Finale sounds are pretty limited. They don't sound great. But anyway, just keep in mind this notation view is available, and it's you toggle it on and off when you're in the MIDI Editor window. And you get to the MIDI Editor window by coming here to Window and selecting it, or another quick way is to Control =+. So here is my edit window. I'm going to push down Control, and here's the =+ sign. It's right next to delete on top, =+ and Control. And when you push those two, you can toggle back and forth between those two windows really quickly. So that's an easy way to get to your editor window. Anyway, thank you for listening, and I just wanted to finish up with that. And with that, we are now done with this week's lesson. So I'll see you guys later.